What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Space Explored podcast. On today's episode, Seth and I discuss iSpace sharing what went wrong with its lunar lander, Virgin Galactic completed its first spaceflight in over 2 years, Rocket Lab completes NASA's Tropics constellation, and the main topic and question of the day, will we ever see another SpaceX Falcon 9 failure? That and more, all here on episode 61.
How's it going, Jared?
Hey, what's going on, man? Back for another day. Hey, 3 in a row.
3 in a row. We're doing it. We're doing this thing. I mean, we have yet to do it on a Tuesday. Or do we do it Tuesday the first week? I don't remember. We're failing on the schedule part, but we're getting them out by Thursday. As long as they're out there. But yeah, welcome back to another episode of the Space Explorer podcast. I'm sure Jared already said that in the intro that he's doing, but I'm going to say it again because I can't. Let's start right away into our first episodes because we're going to go fast. We're going to actually hit our time marks that we have set in our show notes that we've never hit before ever. But one day we will.
Let's do it.
So we're going to iSpace. If you remember, iSpace had some news about a month ago about their lander. The Japanese-based company, hoping to be the first private company to land on the moon, shared the reasoning why its lunar lander crashed on the lunar surface. The company confirmed the reason was due to a software glitch that determined the altitude readings it was getting from the spacecraft was not valid and relied on preloaded estimates. This meant that the spacecraft believed that the lunar surface, it was actually on the lunar surface when actually it was at 5 kilometers above it, leading to the lander to hover until it ran out of fuel crashed. I feel for them because I did a lot of work as a software engineer getting stuff from sensors and having to validate the sensors data because this is the thing, there are 2 parts of developing a spacecraft. I mentioned this in an article. There's hardware and there's software, and they both have very complex and very hard to master things that have to go right for them to even work. Hardware has to be light, but it has to be rigid. It has to survive launch, but it can't be too heavy. It has to there's so much. Also, software has to have.
Yeah, it's like the Venn diagram of
software needs to have fail safes. It needs to have needs to be able to determine if there's a problem and then save the spacecraft before it runs into an issue. It needs to have it needs to be extremely accurate, but relying on as little sensors as possible. It also needs to be doing all of this using as little CPU power and RAM as possible because you're not sending Intel Xeon or chip out into space. You're using practically not even Intel's Pentium yet. I don't even think they're using those yet in space. I think that's still too advanced and too large. I think they're even smaller.
That's insane.
So I mean that'd be similar. I don't know what the current top grade, but I know they're not 8 core, 16 core CPUs. And also not throwing out their
not sending the M1
out. No 1.5 terabytes of RAM. I think you'd be lucky to get 8. So it's very, very complex, very, very hard. And so when I was a software engineer, what you do when you get stuff from a sensor is that you have to validate it against something that you know is true. You can't just assume a sensor is right 100% of the time. Technically, the rule of software engineering in general is never assume anything is right. Assume everything is going to kill you. It's pretty much how software engineering works. And so when you get a sensor in, you have to validate it against, what for me, it was you just had a set value of values hard coded into the software because we didn't really worry about storage uses because we're not in space, and then you just get a reading in. You go does it match the same as this or is it similar enough? Cool, we're fine. And then for pretty much what iSpace did was they preloaded terrain data that they believed that they would exist for whether they would be in flight and what the altitudes should be. And then when they went over the rim of crater, it increased. I can't. Some people I've read said it increased, but I think the press release said some people said it decreased, but I think the press release said it increased by 3,000, by 1,000 meters, or by a kilometer or something. It was a big spike on altitude, and it didn't match up with the predetermined terrain data because they changed their landing spot. They didn't get it tested enough before launching, so it didn't match, and so they just threw out the altitude readings from the spacecraft. And so pretty much it just relied on wrong, preloaded determined values and then crash. So Sucks as a software engineer to like see like like that happens, and like testing, sometimes you don't get test enough, and sometimes it just like breaks when you deploy it, and this is like the worst deployment break ever.
It's a bummer.
When you find a bug and it like
and you only get that one shot at it, right? So it's got to be
like space is such a harder one for software engineers because you have like one shot. Like you can't like, I mean, you can do testing on the ground, and the software is a lot. I think software, in my opinion, is probably a tad bit easier to test on the ground because it's just software. But in this type of scenario, like you kind of have to just rely on previous like altitude readings and just hope they're correct and if they're precise enough. And obviously they didn't get the most precise altitude readings to validate against. And
there's so many variables that you just can't control.
Yeah, there's so much you can't control, and also there's so much that it just hurts. It just hurts. All right. Next up, with Virgin Galactic, not to be confused with Virgin Orbit, although you're not really going to be able to confuse them anymore.
Correct.
Because Virgin Orbit doesn't exist.
Not for
it exists in our hearts. It exists in our hearts. So, for the first time since Virgin Galactic's Richard Branson flew to beat Blue Origin's Jeff Bezos to space, Virgin Galactic completed another trip to space. After 2 years of investigations by the FAA over a mishap during Branson's flight and refurbishment of both the company's VMS Eve mothership aircraft and VSS Unity spaceplane, the company is finally ready to begin commercial operations. Did you? I just said, did you watch it? But then I remembered that they didn't even have a live stream for it.
I did.
You did. You watched it on Twitter, right? Because
I mean, I watched whatever. I guess it was probably the replay, but I do remember watching it.
Yeah, we were all like, a lot of us were a little shocked that they didn't do a live stream because this is a space tourism type product, and so like when you watch Blue Origin's live streams, it's pretty obvious these are very different than SpaceX live streams. Like SpaceX live streams are like, because they like, you can tell like they're doing these live streams because one, they want to share everything with everyone. Like they want to share the launch. Sometimes it's required by NASA, and then they're just really enthusiastic. They want to share it. Like they just like, they have fun doing it, and they just want to do it. And without sharing it, like they don't get the public love. Blue Origin, similar.
Right. I was gonna say, well, it's the free marketing like skills that that Elon has had.
Yeah.
That he's used through all the companies like Tesla, and it's just his free publicity. Like, let's go ahead and put it out there. Obviously, it's not free, but it's free.
Yeah, it's just easy publicity to do.
Free.
Blue Origin, similar. Like I'm sure a lot of people love doing it, and they want to show what they've been working on. But it's an advertisement. Like it is tailored towards people who want to buy tickets on Blue Origin, on New Shepard. The person who runs it, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it's more like watching a roller coaster.
Yeah, like the everything's hyped up to the extreme, like to the point where it's almost comical for some people to watch. Like it's kind of like, sometimes it is absolutely comical for me to watch it because it's like, is it that, like, are you really like these astronauts? And I'm like, whatever. Like it's like, just calm down. Like when they return, like they go over like excited, and there's the champagne pop, and like it's a lot of stuff's over the top. But I think the person who runs it, I think it's their like chief of sales or something, like VP of sales. Like it's definitely it's definitely more led by their sales department rather than the communications department. To get that kind of stuff. Right. Virgin Galactic didn't do one, which is a little shocking because like you kind of want to show off your product. Like you want to show it off. They have a lot of ticket sales because they'll have plenty of opportunity to do it in the future. But like, you kind of want to keep showing off that you're like, this is a thing you can do, and like it's fun. So it flew on. It was 6 people. There were two pilot and a co-pilot, and then 4 Virgin Galactic employees. One of them was I always forget, Mary Beth, or I think is what her name is. She's like their chief astronaut, like in charge of astronaut training. She's flown like 3 or 4. It's like her 3rd or 4th flight, which is, I'm a little jealous. Like that's kind of a cool job. Like, wouldn't you want to just train astronauts to just keep flying the space?
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. So
yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. I think there's like a few. I think someone else handles their government sales because the next flight that they're going to be the first commercial flight, and it's going to be for the Italian Air Force, I believe. I don't think it's their space. I don't think the Italian Space Agency. I think it's the Italian Air Force, who's doing like a research flight, which is again like something that's pretty unique to commercial spaceflight now. Like, instead of having to build your own way of doing it, governments can just purchase seats and go to space. That's what the UAE.
Yeah, just hop a ride.
Yeah, UAE and Saudi Arabia did that for the Axiom, and so they both. Well, we just had the return of Axiom 2 late last night, but they were both up in space at the same time through on the space station through that type of program. So yeah, like I remember when, did you watch Branson's flight 2 years ago?
I did. Yep.
Okay. I remember being so bull on like low Earth commercial spaceflight when that happened. It was like Virgin Galactic's here, yeah, like Blue Origin's here, like it's gonna be like we're gonna see these all the time. And it was kind of like since then it's kind of like okay, now it's gotten old, like, and it's not happening as fast as like
it kind of just disappeared.
Yeah, like Blue Origin still don't like, they haven't launched in a while because they had that mishap, but like it's kind of just like okay, cool. This is going to be similar to like other space ventures where things move very slowly, and it's not going to be as fast paced and exciting.
Yeah, it just seems like, I don't know. It's almost like I feel like it was like sort of where autonomous driving was, where it's like,
oh yeah,
this is the future. Every car is going to have it.
It showed up.
You know, like every company's going to be doing this space flight, right? And then they sort of marketed it as like you can get from point A to point B in the world so much faster because you can go up and then come back down, and you know, like all this sort of sales material type stuff. And then like you said, it just kind of like disappeared.
Then we all realized that like
kind of
the autonomous driving features aren't the greatest. Like it's like you trust it enough to drive yourself, but you want to trust it enough to drive your kids.
Yeah. Then you see the Super Bowl commercial of a Tesla hitting a dummy.
Oh my gosh! Well, that was the whole thing. That's a whole thing. That's a whole. Oh my gosh! If everyone from Electric heard you even mention that, you would get, because that was a whole episode on the Electric podcast about that whole thing. But yeah, so I don't know. Like, exciting that it's back. So it took a while. They kind of like reevaluated the customers' like experience, which like makes sense. Like Richard Branson did that on his flight. That was like his whole thing, was like he was like evaluating the consumer or the customer experience. Makes sense you would have to do that again after 2 years of not doing it. So you would need another kind of like test to like make sure that like the hospitality side thing is great and like the operation side's great and like everything works. So
make sure your whiskey is served nice.
Yeah, make sure like when I ask for it neat, it comes neat. It doesn't come with an ice cube. Like that's right. But also like training and like suiting them, like making sure like they get in like their spacesuits, they get seated and secured properly. I mean, there's valid reasons, but also I just kind of laugh. It was like when Branson was doing it, so is he like gonna order everything on the in the lounge? Like he's gonna get all the drinks and get all the food and like go through the buffet and like all that stuff. Is that what he's doing? Because that's an awesome job. I would love to. I would test that once a year. You need an audit, right?
Yeah.
Have SpaceX Board audit your hospitality. We'll do it for free.
You got to see if it's on point.
All right. Next up is we talked a lot about them last week, but Rocket Lab's back in the news. Rocket Lab lifted off from LC-1B at its private spaceport in New Zealand, carrying the final 2 CubeSats for NASA's, ready for this, time-resolved observations of precipitation, structure, and storm intensity with a constellation of small sats, better known as tropics. That's like one of the top. That's a top tier acronym.
It's a mouthful.
That is one of NASA's best acronyms ever. The agency has 4 of the original 6 CubeSats in orbit, preparing to gather data ahead of this year's hurricane season. A reminder, the first 2 tropics satellites were lost on an Astra rocket when it failed after failure of its second stage. NASA then moved the remaining payloads to Rocket Lab. We talked about this before. Both of us living in Florida. You still living in Florida. Nice to have more data on hurricanes, and maybe it'd be interesting to see. Yes. So I've been an avid hurricane like watcher for like a while. Like I'm like a little bit of a weather geek. So like, I feel bad because now that I live in Florida, I know it's not a joke, but like when I was growing up in Wisconsin, I would just be glued to the Weather Channel during hurricane season. It was like playoffs for me.
Yep.
So
they the broadcast is pretty impressive with their with their like AR overlay.
Oh, nowadays it's like a whole thing.
This like VR hurricane.
Ever since I don't know when they got bought by IBM, but like I think it's whenever they got bought by IBM, it just started going just insane on their. When I watched it, it was like more toned down. Like they were all behind a desk. It was more like a news show. But like nowadays, I can't even watch it. Like it's insane. But yeah, like I'll be interested to see like watching the data, like the models, and see how much more accurate they are, because like we all know, I mean, at least both of us know that like you kind of can't predict a storm until like it's like a couple days out. Like you can try your best, you might know if you're in the area, but like you don't know if you're evacuating or not until like a few days out. So
yeah, that's why the first 5 or 6 days, it's like when they show the path of the storm, it's like there's 6 different paths it could go.
Have you ever watched like
because they're like one of these is going to be
right. And it's like it's like so much more when you look at the like the spaghetti model graphs, where like they're just everywhere. There's always one. Yeah. There's always one that goes to New Orleans, and there's always one that goes to like Texas. And it's like I feel like it's a joke every year. There's one model that goes like, this is going to hit New Orleans. But
right.
It's like they're just everywhere. And so hopefully I'll be interested to see like if those like tighten up maybe a little bit better, or if maybe like a couple more days out, like you can start seeing like better tones. But we'll see. I doubt this year would be the difference. That would be like a couple years, or maybe because I think this is more of a tech demo than like an actual serious model, like a serious constellation. I think it's like they spent a lot of money and time on it, but like it's not really they would probably build up another constellation that's like with like larger satellites to do better in the future if this works out pretty well. Which if you've seen anything recently in the past years, everything usually works out pretty well. So, all right.
Yep.
What time are we at right now?
I don't know. Break. It's break time.
It is break time though. We do a break every time.
Yeah, it's break time.
We'll be right back.
Let's take a quick break and we'll jump into the main topic.
All right, and into our main topic for today's episode. I would say this evening, but we're not on late news. We're not like a primetime news show, and it's also 10:30 a.m. for me. So, last night, SpaceX launched its 200th consecutive mission. Hold on. Sorry, let me read this. SpaceX tonight, because I wrote this as of recording Tuesday, but now it's Wednesday. SpaceX last night launched its 37th rocket of the year, and it was successful. It was its 200th consecutive mission of the Falcon 9 rocket. This doubled the second highest. I had to think about it for a second, like, what am I reading? This doubled the second highest record, which is shared by Russia's Soyuz U rocket and the retired Delta II rocket. Actually, I think the Soyuz U is also retired, but it's just a version of the Soyuz. The previous failed flight of SpaceX was Amos 6, if you remember that, back in 2016, which exploded on the pad during fueling ahead of a static fire. SpaceX now has launched 200 consecutive Falcon 9s, not including the Falcon Heavies. So it's not like, it's more like we had 5 Falcon Heavies so far, so like 205 pretty much, if you include, technically, if you want to include each Falcon Heavy as 3 Falcon 9 launches, it's like, well, that's 15, it's like 215, like, 215 missions pretty much.
Right.
So 200 Falcon 9 launches in a row. The question today is, will we ever see another SpaceX Falcon 9 failure? What do you got an answer for that one?
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Like if anything happens, like
yeah, it's gonna. I mean, it's gonna happen, man. Yeah, it's gonna happen. It's still. I mean, it's the. It's the same thing about like car crashes, right? Mm-hmm. The more you drive, the more likely it's gonna happen. It doesn't matter how long you've gone it without a crash, but at some point, I mean, this just from the nature of what they're doing, even though they've got it down to an exact science. So it's just crazy. It seems like, back in the day, the smallest weather, change would sort of throw them off their track, and now that's not even doing it anymore. So
we used to have memes.
It's definitely down to an exact science, but
we had memes, dude. We had memes for weather. Like we have the upper level wind Twitter account. Like and that no longer. I don't see that being used ever because we don't have upper level wind constraints.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So it's definitely an exact science, but again, like it's still human made. So there's always the human error part of it. It's mechanical. There's software that's always running. There's things out of their force. There's that whatever small amount of variables that they can't control. So yeah, at some point it's gonna happen, dude. It's gonna happen. But they're on a pretty good streak right now.
Yeah,
right?
I'm a little more surprised. I should have looked up the number of how many in a row we have, but how many of the it's been at least 2 years. Or a year and a half at least. No, it was 2021, I think, was the last time we had a landing failure on a drone ship. So, like...
Right.
But, so SpaceX also learned, like, when it can and can't land. Like, it kind of knows it ahead of time, like, that this mission just won't succeed in a landing. So they've kind of... Those missions just don't get a landing. A lot of times, those are the center cores of Falcon Heavies or more intensive Falcon 9 flights into orbit, heavier payloads and to more difficult orbits. So they just toss them now. Which it hasn't happened that much, but remember Elon saying that was like has a lower success rate. Just does. It's just like landing on a barge in the middle of the ocean.
The landing.
Yeah, it's just there's a lot more different. It's so hard that we've added in like failures, and I think.
Well, if you just think about, just do the basic concept, right? If you're going up into space, right? Your target is like this massive area, right? You've got the open sky, right? There's no real target. Where there is a target obviously, but there's no. It's the margin for error to hit that target is so much bigger, right? Yeah. Where you're coming back down, you're literally landing on a grain of sand.
Yeah, like compared up there, you're not even that. It's like
the target is so small.
Not even a pixel, like on any camera. So like it's just extensively harder to do and like more chance of failures. But we haven't seen one in a while, which is impressive. Like very, very impressive.
Right.
200 launches in a row is also really impressive.
Well, like you said, I think the reason, and going back to like you were saying the landing, the reason why is because they're like, well, if we take a chance and try to land it, in this climate or this condition, we know it's probably more than likely to fail. So we may as well just lose the booster anyway and launch the payload, because that's the more important part of getting what we need to get up into orbit. So
another thing that I think has limited their failure rate compared to like other rockets that were launched like 200 times is that you're launching a brand new second stage every time, but you're not launching a brand new first stage every time. So like you're flying those flight proven boosters that like a lot of times failures happen where it's just there was an issue with manufacturing, like something got put in wrong, something didn't get checked right, and so when it's a brand new rocket and it launches, it fails. When you've already launched that rocket, you've already tested it to like the maximum you can test it to prove that it's capable, and so you're not going to get like a first stage failure. And as long as I think 14 or 15, I think is the highest number right now. Like, I think where we'll start seeing failures, if we see a failure, is definitely going to be probably on a Starlink mission, and it's definitely going to be like in like one of those high number flights, like when they're like pushing it to a new milestone. Just because Elon said that like at this point we're just going to keep flying them until we see something fail, and maybe it's a failure that we'll see, and maybe it's a failure that we won't see. Like I wouldn't be surprised if you see like engine like an engine pop out, like because like they have 9 engines, so it's designed to like lose an engine, I think, and still be able to make it to orbit. And I think that'd be interesting to see if you start seeing those more than like we probably won't, rather than a structural failure, because those engines I think fly more than the boosters. Like I think there's less engines than boosters. So not less engines for boosters. I think that's what I've heard. Is that's true. And so like there's some of those engines that have been flying for a while now. It just one just to cut out, and of course now, because that's a human rated. Because if that happens, it'd be interesting to see what happens with NASA because it's a human-rated spaceflight, rocket, and so NASA would have to be involved with, of course, any sort of investigation, and whether or not they would ground the rocket for anything, like an engine cutout, like if an engine cut out early. I wonder if that would be enough. If it's on like a high flight numbered engine and a high flight number booster, I wonder if NASA would be like, or the FAA would be like, okay, like don't launch your high number boosters for a bit then until we figure it out, but you can launch your lower number boosters still. Like I wonder if that would be interesting to see if that happens. Just because this is something that we've never seen before.
Yeah, and I imagine they put their best foot forward material-wise.
Oh, yeah.
Between the boosters and the engine for the human flights, right? Like that's obviously the safest. They got to be the safest route there, Yeah,
the boosters that get selected for human space flight go under so much scrutiny, and they're chosen much longer and much further in advance than like a normal commercial flight would be, and that is like. I remember hearing that like when NASA chooses like a NASA mission, doesn't matter if it's a crewed spaceflight or an uncrewed spaceflight for NASA, like they choose a booster like a while out, and that is their booster, and they baby that booster like it's their favorite child until it launches. So like they take a lot of care into those missions that like especially fly any very, very important payload like for NASA or humans. They try those are really, really important. Yeah, really, really important. Although I remember before. Inspiration 4, I think they went and saw their booster launch before they launched. And I think it was only maybe 6 months ahead of time. So yeah, that is interesting. That was kind of cool to see that they went to go see their booster launch. So
yeah,
which is something only SpaceX can do. So yeah, 200 launches though, that's impressive. And it would be. I wonder how high it's going to get before we start seeing any issues. And it's a matter of when, rather not if, because I think we both said you can't control everything. Eventually, things are going to fail, especially if you're flying boosters for a very, very long. Eventually, something's going to break. So it'd be interesting to see what breaks and when it breaks. Yep. That's no estimates I think on when that could happen because I think the number was like 10, and you'll start seeing failures and. That looks like it's fine. So saying like 20 would be like there's nothing to prove that 20 would be a limit. 50, who knows? I don't know. Like maybe we will be flying these boosters for like 500-600 times, or like we'll be seeing 500-600 launches before like we see something wrong. Who knows? Thank you everyone for watching the Space and Sport podcast. If you are watching us on YouTube, thank you so much. Make sure that you leave a like, subscribe, and comment because I go through those. We got like 11 comments on our first episode back, so I went through and I replied to a bunch of those. So yeah, make sure you do that because we always love seeing the comments. And if you're listening to us on a podcast app, make sure you leave us a rating because podcasts are really crazy. You get to be shown to people. You need reviews, and to get reviews, you need to be shown to people.
Yep.
So yeah. So if you are listening to us, please leave us a review and at least 4 stars. We're not asking for 5. We're not asking for 5. 4 stars.
Yeah,
we're not asking for more. Everyone else, thank you so much for listening. And if you can find us, of course, on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Google Podcasts, Spotify, whatever. Actually, we might have an issue with Spotify. We might actually not be on Spotify right now, but. That is being fixed. It's not an us thing. It's a network thing. We might have been removed from Spotify next.
Yep.
But we're working on getting that fixed. But you can also find us at spacesport.com, and you can follow along spacesport.com for your news on the spaceflight industry. Lastly, we have a Discord. Go join the Discord. Link will be in the description. It's pretty much a place for me to hang out and hopefully find people to talk to.
Talk.
If you want to
talk to yourself.
Yeah, I talk to myself pretty much. Yeah, I posted something about like I finished the Elon Musk book, like the original Ashley Vance Elon Musk book. Finally, after like 5-6 years of it being out, and I like made a post on it, and no one commented. It's just me. It's just sometimes I even like my post. So don't like my post. So have a good one. We'll see you guys all next week.